Couple seconds.
It says it's streaming.
So here we go. We're now online on YouTube for this special show of Fenestration in Canada. So Patrick, you can start that.
All right. Thanks a lot, Stefan. Yeah, I'm Pat Flannery. I'm the editor of Fenestration Review magazine. You've seen me on a lot of these now, and joined as always with Stefan Labelle from Fenestration Canada. Say hi, Stefan.
Hey Pat.
Hey. It's the Fenestration Canada broadcast, and we are excited today to have. I'm going to do it wrong. No, I'm not. Aiñe Curran and Stan Rodriguez from the Vinyl Institute of Canada have joined us. Today and we're good because we really got to talk about some of the changes that have been coming in the plastics legislation. Proposed changes that are coming to plastics environmental regulation in the industry and really across Canada. But before we get into that, a little bit of housekeeping. We're brought to you today again by Quanex and UL. Thanks very much. Great supporters of the association and the podcast and the industry across Canada. Definitely encourage you to go and thank those people whenever you can. To ask a question today, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom call. You can type in that. I will see it and I will pass that along. There is also a chat box. That's just going to sort of be messages to us. Terry Adamson is already having a good time in there. Apparently, I look like the Friendly Giant today, so that's cool. You remember that guy with the little chair and the yeah. Anyways, that was a long time ago. And people of a certain age will not get that reference. And then we also have we do have the raise your hand function. So if you're really excited about anything that's being said and you want to get right in here and join us on the broadcast, you can do the raise your hand thing. And I think Stefan's going to keep his eye on that and probably let us know if somebody wants to get in, and then we can do that as well, and you can join right in the discussion. However, Stan's got a little more. Stan's got a really good presentation laid out for us today with a lot of detail. So we're probably going to hold Q&A until after Stan's done, and then everybody can get in and we can just have total chaos like we usually do. So that's the preamble. Now I want to introduce Aiñe Curran and Stan Rodriguez. Aiñe, why don't you start us off? Just say hi to all the good folks, introduce yourself a little, and maybe tell us a little bit about the Vinyl Institute and what you guys do.
Great, thanks, Patrick. Hi, all the good folks. It's great to be back here again. Stefan, thank you so much for welcoming us back here to give a bit of an update to the industry about what's happening with the movements that Environment and Climate Change Canada are currently undertaking. I think just first of all, I want to you mentioned something about legislation, and I wanted to be really clear, and I'm sure Stan will mention this as he goes through his talk as well, is this isn't a legislative change. It is in fact a regulatory change. So unfortunately, it doesn't require parliamentary oversight. It's really just something that the government can now do at their convenience, really. And so last time when I was on, I think it was at the time when I first discussed really what was happening. This time, now that we've had a chance to really work with the issue, work with the documents, work with the perspectives and the papers, the official papers with Environment and Climate Change Canada, things have settled a little bit, and now we really want to come and just help you understand, those of you that are in the vinyl sector, how the vinyl industry in particular will be able to move through this really well. So Stan, back to you, Patrick. I really think, I don't need to do more than that. I think as we go through, Stan has done a brilliant job in putting all of this together in a nice chronological fashion, and I think it'll come across well.
Yeah, thanks, Aiñe. And you guys have done really a great job in explaining these issues and communicating to everybody what the changes are all the time. And I think going back and forth between industry and government and trying to update them. So we always appreciate the work of the Vinyl Institute. Stan, why don't you give us a little intro of yourself and tell us what you're doing for the Vinyl Institute of Canada, and just give us the background.
Great. Well, thank you, Patrick. Good morning to everybody. I'm really pleased to be here. Sorry, of course, as soon as I get on, I get a phone call.
Well, people are probably calling excited, you know, Stan, that you know, you're on TV here. Basically.
That's probably it. Just a little bit on my background. I've been in industry for 42 years now, primarily in the government relations area, specifically focusing in on health, safety, and environment. Worked for a number of multinational companies, and have been very active in the plastics field for the last 25 years. I've been retired for a couple of years, but I'm finding myself about 50% occupied just on this file alone. So it's a very interesting time to be around, and I hope that I can help move things forward for industry.
Well, I'll avoid the obligatory Godfather 3 reference about being dragged back in every time you talk it out.
If I could just note one thing about Stan, many of you that are in the vinyl sector, particularly in window profiles, as it is with Fenestration Canada, Stan is one of the very key people in the vinyl industry who has led and elevated the environmental performance agreement on tin stabilizer. So when you see all of those machinations that are happening in the background with Environment and Climate Change Canada, Stan really is the person who was one of the team of pioneers who brought that to a reality. And in fact, because tin stabilizer could have ended up on the toxic substances list, the voluntary agreement it has avoided that for us. We've been able to put ourselves into a category of partnership with the government on this particular substance. So Stan is really just the king of tin stabilizer EPA management. So, and today continues to work on that file with us. So back to you now, Patrick.
He's pulling the levers that move the world. I can see that. That's fantastic. So we got a great guy with us today to talk about all of this stuff. I guess Aiñe, we're going to go right to Stan and his presentation at this point. Stan, why don't you go ahead and share your screen and get set up there, and walk us through all the changes we need to know about with Canadian regulations around plastic.
Okay, I will. And I guess the first thing that we thought maybe would be helpful, and Aiñe, I don't know if you want to give a setup on this. This is the federal government announcement on October the 7th regarding single-use plastics. Aiñe, is there another setup you want to do?
Well, we're going to start with the video then?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So basically, this was about, a month or so ago when Jonathan Wilkinson, the Minister of the Environment, made the official announcement about the ban of certain plastics. And as you will see as we go through Stan's presentation, really this is just to do with single-use plastics. This is the very beginning of what we believe will involve a short game and a long game in terms of where plastic products end up, whether they're single-use or durables. With respect to the vinyl industry, about 3 to 5% of our global production of flexible or packaging materials it's only 3 to 5% that of our total manufacturing that represents any kind of flexible packaging materials. So even at that, we're not front and center like the 6 products that they're looking to ban by the end of 2021. So I think that that's enough. And then with the clip, it'll explain that a little bit more meaningfully, I think.
Okay, and just let me know when you want me to stop it.
Yeah. So
are you sharing screen there, Stan?
Are you sharing
I thought so. Can you not see it?
We're not seeing
Nope, not as of now.
Let me try that.
Oh, here we go.
Ici au Canada et ailleurs dans le monde. La priorité absolue de notre gouvernement est de maintenir la santé et la sécurité des Canadiens, notamment en soutenant les familles et les entreprises qui sont en difficulté.
Translate, Stefan.
But Canadians expect their
There you
government
go.
to be capable of addressing the COVID issue and addressing other challenges at the same time. Canadians expect that their government will take important actions that are required to protect their environment, including the threats posed by pollution. Plastic pollution threatens our natural environment. It fills our rivers, our lakes, and most particularly our oceans, choking the wildlife that live there. Canadians see the impacts that pollution has from plastics and microplastics, even in the northernmost regions of this country. Today, the federal government published the final science assessment on plastic pollution. The science assessment found that plastic is causing significant harm to wildlife, particularly marine life, who often ingest plastic or become entangled in it. Microplastics are everywhere, in food, in bottled water, in tap water, both indoor and outdoor air. And the long-term potential health effects of microplastics are not yet clear. And the problem is getting worse. Action is needed to ensure plastic is kept out of our environment. Canadians throw away about 3 million tons of plastic waste every year, which is equal to 570 garbage bags full every minute, every day, and only 9% of that plastic is presently recycled.
Okay, I think that's enough.
Landfills?
I think we're good there.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that recycling reference is really part of, where we're going to be following this discussion for the next hour. So back to you, Stan.
Okay, great. Well, again, good morning to everybody. So what I'm going to try to do is just provide some context first, and then look down and maybe a little bit more at some specific issues that will be of interest. So you heard the minister mention there's been a global focus on plastic waste, and a lot of it to do with marine impacts. And he used the term entanglement at one point. And when you look at the science that we're going to refer to in the course of the presentation, that seems to be their strongest touch point. This is nothing new for the Liberal Party. Banning single-use plastics has always been, well, certainly since 2015, been a significant policy plank. And specifically, there was a commitment in the first elected term, and not only to this, but to the Paris Accord, and it was reinforced during the recent election campaign throw speech. We've had many discussions, we being the Vinyl Institute of Canada with Environment and Climate Change Canada, to try to understand exactly where they were going with this. And their very clear stated goal is single-use plastics that are harmful when discarded. And that's the lens that is being used right now to drive these very specific regulatory proposals. And just an underlying principle is that in order to apply any kind of risk management measures, whether that's a ban or enforced collection infrastructure or recycled contact, all of that, before any of that can happen, it means that a substance must be added to Schedule 1 of the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, which in essence means that you're declaring that substance toxic. And that connotation is a very important one for the plastics industry right now, considering how many health and benefits are being derived, whether that's in the medical area, whether that's in personal protective equipment, especially related to COVID, or whether that's in providing safe drinking water. It's hard for people to understand, we believe, that those very valuable applications could come from something that the government is proposing to declare toxic. So some of the current documents that are being bandied around, and what I want to mention is the ones that I have highlighted in green are really the ones that you may want to look at a little bit more closely. So you heard the minister mention the science assessment of plastic pollution, which is called the final assessment. There was a draft that came out, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but this is their foundation document to justify moving forward with any kind of regulatory action. After that, there was also published a integrated management approach to plastic production products rather to prevent waste and pollution. And I'm going to refer to this as the discussion paper, so I don't have to repeat that lengthy term. Then, of course, they're obligated when they want to use a science assessment to justify regulatory action. They need to post a notice in the Canada Gazette, and that document is available online. Probably not going to add much to the conversation. A really important one is the specific notice in the Gazette of an order adding a toxic substance to Schedule 1. And in this particular case, they've said plastic manufactured items. If you do not have that, we've included the link on this slide for you to gain access. Some of the other reference documents, which are a little bit more dated, but for those of you who really want to dig down, there was an economic study by Deloitte that was commissioned by Environment and Climate Change Canada in 2019. It's a very lengthy study. There is also an internal Environment and Climate Change Canada document, which we have not got access to, by ChemInfo Services, and it's assessment of single-use plastics in Canada. And it's basically looking at how much is manufactured, how much is actually used, how much is disposed, and what the environmental fate of those things are. So these are all some background documents that once we've been through this presentation, you may want to go back and refer to. So a little bit of context. One thing about the science assessment is that it's made a very clear distinction between what is called plastic waste, which is plastic that is entering some kind of managed waste stream. So recycling, incineration, landfill. And then what the assessment is really focusing on is plastic pollution. So this is materials that are plastic that enter the environment outside of those managed waste streams. So they're thrown on the ground, they're thrown in the water, they're abandoned, in some cases, equipment, et cetera, from fisheries. So it's important for us to understand that we're using an assessment to justify action, but the action that's being proposed is beyond just the pollution in the science assessment, but also to not only waste, but every aspect of the life cycle of plastics. Now, in the science assessment, they refer to the precautionary principle. I'm not sure how much most of you know about that, but it is intended to be a drive policy. And what that means is that they've referred in the science assessment that the precautionary principle should be applied, and that's what's driving this proposed order to add plastic manufactured items to Schedule 1. And once that's done, that means that Environment and Climate Change Canada can then adopt this risk management framework in the discussion paper.
Just if I could make a note there, just an add on a little side note there, Stan. Really what that means is that the government is not obliged to provide really sound research or data to support their argument that they should be able to ban plastic manufactured products. And typically this type of an approach would, the precautionary principle, correct me Stan if I'm wrong, really has to do with what they consider to be an environmental emergency. So they're using this tool in their toolkit to sort of move it into the regulatory space versus a legislative space where they would require the House of Commons to vote on it. And that's it.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you, Aiñe. So what's happened so far on this particular file? Well, back in the end of January, the draft science assessment, they refer to it as a state of science review, was published for comment and input on whether it justified adding plastics to Schedule 1. And what's interesting about this is normally when they're adding substances, they follow a very formalized multi-stage risk assessment process. And industry and other stakeholders actually come to committee meetings and are entitled to make presentations and provide technical data, et cetera, to the risk assessment process. Well, that was not what was followed here. What was relied on was looking at existing studies, and I'll talk about some of the challenges with that in a few minutes. So it was not the normal, let me say, a dialogue that we would normally expect. It's really been a, here's what we think, you tell us what you think about it. Comments were submitted by stakeholders, including VIC. Basically, we said, this is a really broad approach. You're talking about every plastic that's out there. The science that you're referring to has significant gaps. We don't believe that it supports action at this point for a number of different reasons. Some of the studies are very dated. Some of them are not able to be extrapolated easily. And the timing is inappropriate. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and we're trying to push through arguably one of the most significant environmental initiatives ever undertaken by the federal government. People's attention is, not on that ball right now. And in our arguments we were making, and without plastic right now during the pandemic, thousands and thousands of lives would be at risk. Interestingly, our comments were really not effectively responded to, and in fact, were not reflected in the final science assessment. And we think that's really important.
That's also the case for a number of other associations, by the way, who made submissions. And it basically indicated to us that this is just something that they're going through a process so that they can say that they went through the process. But there was a lot of comments that were not acknowledged for their final assessment.
Yeah, we firmly believe that this is being driven by ideological positions and by certain influencers who are not necessarily directly within government, but who have the ear of government. I should mention that these comments needed to be submitted by the end of April of this year. And it was interesting, we followed up with the federal government numerous times over the course of the summer, and they said, just hold on. And then lo and behold, surprise, surprise, October the 7th, there's this announcement that you saw the short clip from by the Minister of Environment, intending to ban several specific single-use plastics by the end of 2021. We had a very short notice that this announcement was going to be made, and very quickly the next day, Environment and Climate Change Canada released this discussion paper, proposed integrated management approach to plastic products to prevent waste and pollution. And in this particular document, this is where the rationale is laid out to propose a ban on 6 very specific plastic items. 5 of the 6 are very specific. Bags, plastic bags we're familiar with, plastic straws, plastic stir sticks, 6-pack rings from beverage containers, cutlery, and then the one that isn't very clear right now is what's called food packaging and serviceware. And what's really important to understand is that their decision flow diagram has been used, and where they have seen products that meet both categories of environmentally problematic and value recovery problematic, those are the things that they've decided to move on first. And it's important to understand that this is their first kick at the can. The other thing is that the discussion paper does lay the groundwork for further restrictions on other single-use plastics or other plastics throughout their life cycle, and including the potential for mandating a minimum recycled content. And at the same day, they released the final science assessment that we've referred to already. Then on October the 10th, so you can see happened really, really quickly, the assessment notice was posted in Canada Gazette saying that the final assessment had been published and accepted, and the order to add plastic manufactured items to Schedule 1 was posted in the Canada Gazette. We now have until December the 9th, 2020, to make comments on both the order and the proposed approach that's outlined in the discussion paper. And as Aiñe mentioned, and I think it's important for us to keep in mind, because this is really a regulatory action as opposed to a legislative action, the only requirement is the Minister of the Environment decides to designate plastics as toxic. Kind of a semantic here is, and I'll talk about some of the consultations that are going on in a few minutes, but they're trying to make a distinction. Well, we're not calling plastics toxic, we're only calling plastic manufactured items as potentially toxic. And our point, of course, is that nobody manufactures plastic resin without intending to process them in some kind of product. Because it's a regulatory change, there's no necessity to have support from any other parties in the current minority. Okay, so I think what I'd like to do is just look quickly at the actual language. This is, I just copied and pasted this from the actual order that was put out in the Canada Gazette. And there's a couple of things in here that are kind of recurring themes. One of the most important ones here is ECCC has determined that non-regulatory measures, so things like voluntary agreements, like we have with the Environmental Protection Agreement on tin stabilizer, guidelines or codes of practice weren't enough. They felt that they've concluded that actual regulation is necessary. The second thing is that they have found that they believe that plastic manufactured items pose a risk to the environment, human health, or both. And there's some question, certainly at a technical level, which we're pursuing, that we believe will actually bring that into some substantial question. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is just reinforcing the point about the precautionary principle. Where there are threats of serious or irreversible damage is a very important phrase to understand from that precautionary principle. So those are some of the things that I think are most important from the actual order itself. Let me just go back now. Okay. So here's where we sit. What are we going to do about it? Is the next question, right? Well, our plan is to challenge the scope of this order for a number of reasons. First of all, it's premature. There are too many gaps, and the assessment itself recognizes that additional research is needed. And it's interesting when you listen to the minister's comments in the video clip. He's talking about how big a concern microplastics is, but one of the biggest gaps that the research, including that was cited in the science assessment, is we don't know enough about what the impact of microplastics is. So it's interesting to us that given that the science assessment is so cautious about moving forward, that the government has decided to run full steam ahead. It's not really aligned. The order itself is not aligned with the assessment. The assessment is looking at pollution, and it does not include waste. But most of the focus of this order and the actions that are going to come from the regulations are going to be focused on waste. It's very arbitrary to completely take one complete category of products and say this is going to be, this is what we're going to do. And by doing it this way, it also means that it can be very arbitrary in the way that the federal government will move on additional plastics in the future. In our view, it's a broad, blunt tool that should have been targeted, directly connected to the data coming from the science assessment to the action that they intend. And as I mentioned on a call of our task force a few days ago, it's very, very hard to connect any dots in that way. It applies to all plastics just to support that, including, you know, many of the durable applications, such as the ones that your members are involved in. And they're virtually already meeting the zero waste target that the government has adopted, as opposed to limiting it to those very specific applications. And for example, in the studies that they're citing, it's clear that 47% of the waste that they're concerned about is related to packaging. So why are we going with the entire plastics sector? And the last thing, and this is starting to get into a more technical thing, which we don't have time for today, but various polymers of plastic have different chemistry and different impacts. They certainly have different physical characteristics. I mentioned about microplastics and macroplastics already. Well, the assessment isn't really, and the proposed actions aren't really taking that into account. And at the end of the day, it really means that it's one size does not fit all. And that's what's trying to be pushed through. There are some specific science things that we will be pursuing. It's very clear in section 64 of CEPA that in order to be declared toxic and added to Schedule 1, you need to meet a certain definition. And we don't believe that the science assessment has done enough to support that. We don't think that the science assessment has demonstrated this important phrase from the precautionary principle of serious and irreversible characteristics. It's very interesting that so many of the studies that they have are not based on Canadian experience or research, particularly as it relates to the concentrations of various plastics that are in the environment and eventually get into organisms, wildlife, etc. And it's very questionable whether you can extrapolate the data that you see from Southeast Asia, for example, into the Canadian context. And we should be remembering that the federal government is supposed to be regulating for the Canadian environment primarily. We believe that the precautionary principle has been applied during this assessment when that's not appropriate, and particularly when they're estimating what concentrations are and how high those concentrations need to be to result in the toxicological impacts that they're worried about. Traditionally, the precautionary principle is a policy tool. It is not a research tool. And that's an important distinction that we think we need to make. And a lot of what we're going to be basing our submission on is from one of the most eminent toxicologists in not only North America, but probably the world, Dr. Ron Breacher. And he's actively working to provide us some background information that we'll be including in our submission.
And Stan, if I could just insert a little bit about Dr. Breacher, just for context. A number of years ago, probably back in early 2000, 2001, 2002, Toronto decided to make a bid for the Olympics, to host the Olympics in Toronto. And during that period, the city council had one member on city council. His name is Adam Vaughan, who is actually now parliamentary secretary to the Prime Minister, and who is not fond of PVC, for example. So he had tabled a motion back at that time to ask that council move a motion to ban all PVC from the Olympic bid. Dr. Ron Breacher was the toxicologist who came in, made the presentation before City Council, and reversed that motion really in its tracks. So just to give you a little bit of background, that Dr. Breacher is quite well versed in our sector, but he also is familiar with all kinds of issues surrounding the plastics industry. So go ahead, Stan.
Great, thanks, Aiñe. And of course, I've worked with Dr. Breacher now for about 35 years, so I know him very well, and he is, as I mentioned, quite eminent in his field. The plan regarding the actual discussion paper, as opposed to the order to add plastic manufactured items to Schedule 1, it's not as well filled in yet. We're still working on that with our task force. But there are a number of premises in the discussion paper and some of the objectives that that ECCC says that they want to meet, but they do not align with the findings from the assessment, and they don't align, in our opinion, with the real world. So, for example, one of them is the low rate of recyclability. Well, when you look at certainly the durables area, there's a huge amount of recycling going on within the vinyl industry in Canada right now, and in not only recycling and reusing materials that have been manufactured within Canada, but also materials that are being imported from other parts of the world. So we believe that to be missing in their opening premise. The scope for single-use plastics, which they outline on pages 6 and 7. I mean, this document is very long. I couldn't possibly put it up on the screen. But in that case, we really don't agree that they've properly characterized things that are single-use and intended for disposal right away, as opposed to materials that could very easily be recycled and reused. The charts that they are using to characterize various plastics and thereby propose specific risk management measures are very, very confusing. They're hard to follow, and they don't seem to be justified, again, by what the data from the science assessment has shown. Probably the most important part of this is it's great to say, oh, we're going to ban something, but there's no process that evaluates the environmental impacts of the proposed alternatives. And so just as an example, think about plastic bags, and they're very visible. I mean, there's no question that when somebody throws a plastic bag out on the ground and it blows around and get caught in trees, but you say, okay, well, what's the impact of the alternative? So you say probably paper, but when you think about the fact that you're now using, a natural resource, the amount of energy, the service life, et cetera, most of the estimates are that paper bags have 6.5 times the environmental impact of a plastic bag. Now, whether we end up with plastic bags or don't at the end of the day, the point is that anytime you're proposing an alternative, they should be held to the same scrutiny as what they're being proposed to replace. And that does not seem to be part of the plan in the government's discussion paper. Okay, so I'm just going to change to a different document to give you some idea. This is a timeline that we've developed at the Vinyl Institute of Canada for our submission. And we've been meeting with our task force since, October the 16th. We're going to be meeting on a weekly basis to update. I wanted to comment on a couple of things. You'll notice on October 30th, I have initial stakeholder meeting with Environment and Climate Change Canada. So they have established a series of 6 webinars for any stakeholder that wants to participate. And certainly if there's anyone from your organization that wants to, we can provide you with the connection and information. 5 of those meetings are going to be held on Friday afternoons, starting last week. And they're very large groups. They're very difficult. They're being held by Zoom, as you can imagine. But they're very controlled in terms of what kind of input can be made, what kind of feedback comes back, their screening questions, that sort of thing. But what's really important for us is on November the 10th, we will be getting our draft report from Dr. Breacher. So for the technical input that we want to include in our submission. And then we will be finalizing our reports roughly on December the 1st. So as of December the 4th, we intend to have our final submission ready. And Aiñe will talk a little bit later about how we think you may want to help support us in that regard. Let me just come back here. And then, so I mentioned a bit earlier that this was not the normal process that Environment and Climate Change Canada is following, that the science assessment approach, as opposed to the more formal risk assessment model. The only other example that we've been able to identify from Environment and Climate Change Canada is a process that they used for microbeads. So I'm extrapolating from what they did in that particular process to what we believe will happen with this particular file. So the next step will be publicizing in the Canada Gazette the actual final order that adds plastic manufactured items to Schedule 1. There will be a proposed regulation that will come up for the 6 specific items that we've talked about already. And normally that would be done by issuing a consultation document first, which would allow a 30-day public comment period. Then following that, receiving the comments in that process, then there will be publication of the proposed regulation for those 6 specific single-use plastic items. And that, under regulation, needs a 75-day comment period. And then following that comment period, there will be a final regulation that is published in the Canada Gazette, and it will come into force on a day that it's signed in by the Governor General. After that is done, we fully expect Environment and Climate Change Canada to go back to those charts that are in the discussion paper and further characterize other plastic applications and proposed future actions for what they've called problem plastics, which we're really struggling with that terminology and trying to understand what their definition of that means. And what I want to assure you is that each time that there is proposed action, they will need to enact a regulation, and that regulation will involve the same consultation period and the same public comment period. So, you know, it's not like this is completely a done deal. Every time they want to do an additional action, we have an opportunity to influence that. So I'm going to turn over now to Aiñe, and Aiñe is going to talk a little bit about outreach.
Okay. So Stan, are you going to just click the buttons for
Yep.
the,
Yep.
Thank you.
So
Okay.
There you go.
All right, so thank you, Stan. That was a really excellent you know, really easy to follow. So I'm hoping that if anyone has any questions, that they'll make sure that they put them on the chat box there for Patrick to bring to our attention. So in the meantime, we have we're mounting a few things. Stan had mentioned that we started in October with this. We actually formed our plastics task force back in March when we learned of the first draft science assessment on plastic pollution in January of this year. So we have been sort of, as we've been going, it's sort of hurry up and wait, as you can imagine, is fairly standard with the government. But really the big thrust started when the minister made the announcement, as you saw in the clip, just at the beginning of this webinar. So Stan obviously is our VP of Regulatory Affairs, and he has done an outstanding job. We have our board members, many of them who are also engineers, technical experts. We have industry technical experts. Dr. Ron Breacher has most definitely one of our most important key input in terms of expertise. He's worked with government, Health Canada and Environment Canada for many, many years, and knows how these things work and how to maneuver through some of the more cryptic processes that we've been finding as we've been going along. We also have the Vinyl Institute in Washington, D.C., who is contributing as well. There's Rich Kroc, who's the Senior Vice President of Regulatory and Technical Affairs for the Vinyl Institute. Those of you who know Rich, outstanding, unbelievable contributions, and really helps us to make refinements as we go, as well as helping us to deal with a lot of the compare and contrast situations to Canada and the US. Dominic DeCaria, who's also with the VI in sustainability and regulatory and technical affairs. We've formed a Vinyl Institute of Canada Strategic Communications Group. And the reason for that is because although we know that the technical approach is going to be important for this, we're also putting together an approach that will help us to push our messaging to the government, push our messaging to the industry, and push our messaging to the public. One of the reasons why we're here today, obviously, is because we want to make everybody aware of this issue. In the vinyl industry today, it's not really creating a lot of problems for us at this point, but we are here to talk about the short game and the long game here today. So our communications group is really, we put it together, which is comprised of a number of communications experts and from our respective industries, along with some of our government relations folks, so that we can pull together some missives that we can start putting out and providing for everybody to post on their social media platforms where possible and where appropriate. We did a joint letter with the VI, the Vinyl Institute in Washington, to our global vinyl partners to ask them to help us to build this movement to push back on the government. And I can't say enough how really important it is for us to push back on this as not just as a vinyl industry, but I think all industry. If you're even impacted by this kind of on the sidelines, it's really important to submit those comments because we are into a new reality in terms of the government's thrust or approach to these green initiatives. I don't know if any of you had the chance to see the Prime Minister's throne speech on the 23rd of September, but it was laid out that these were going to be very specific, targeted efforts for environmental initiatives. One of the reasons that we know the Prime Minister is doing that is because the OECD has actually issued a report about a year or so ago they would projected that Canada would actually be about 20% short of the goals that they had promised under the Paris Accord. So as the government is actually in a minority position, you can understand now why going through a regulatory path versus a legislative path would have been their option or their choice. So the new reality will also include every single other industry. So Stan alluded to that back when he talked about paper versus plastic. Many of you may be familiar with, if there's any folks from the fenestration in the manufacturing of wood windows, will know the Resolute Forest Products fight with Greenpeace. And those types of fights will inform various governments around the world, not just here in Canada or North America, about vulnerabilities in the industry. And however those things work out, you can rest assured that the regulators and the government will be drawing information. So the point being is that it's not just about plastics that we're moving into now. Every single material in the manufacturing sector, although historically has been reviewed for various regulatory purposes, there's going to be a much greater magnification on that. And it's not just going to be about plastics. This is just where they're starting, and they're going to be looking at all of those other industries as well. So we sent a joint letter, as I mentioned, to our global vinyl partners on the global industry. We have about 35, 40 global associations that we stay in regular communications with, and can always rely on them to take the submissions that we provide, send in an email under their respective names, and along with some of their comments, or just brief comments in an email supporting the comments that the Vinyl Institute of Canada have provided. We also have a letter writing campaign that is hosted on our Vic website. And this is really more to target a lot of the folks that are perhaps not only working in the plastics industry, but industries that may be impacted by the plastics, by this issue, to write a letter to the government to say, we don't agree with this. It's interesting about the pandemic, as Stan had mentioned earlier. This is one pandemic, and if we're to believe the folks like Bill Gates, who has been out there since 2015 talking about, there's going to be a big pandemic, it's not just one. And so once we get through this one, they are predicting that there's going to be more pandemics down the road. So really making sure that we find making sure that the government understands the role of plastics in any pandemic is really crucial right now. And so on our website, the vinylinstituteofcanada.com, as Stan has just put up some of those letters, it's a very simple process. And this is kind of a call to action that we're asking everybody to go to the website, send the link to anybody in your organizations. And again, whether you're vinyl, whether you're wood, whether you're aluminum, fiberglass, I think it's really important for the government to understand that manufacturing is pushing back. Like, we already know now that with the current state of our economy, because of COVID, everything is compromised right now in terms of jobs. And to be making this kind of a move, as Stan said, in COVID-19 in the middle of a global pandemic, it's just an illogical step, and it's not well thought out, and it isn't an emergency. And so it's important to let the government know that. So when you go to our website, there'll be 2 letters, one in French, one in English. It's very simple. You just put in your address, your name, your postal code, and you click I accept the terms and push submit, and it will go to the member of parliament in the riding of the person who's filled it out. It takes less than 1 minute. And on the website, we've given a backgrounder on the left side of the page that it's on, and then the actual letter on the right. So if we could go down, is that the end of this slide, Stan, the Fenestration Canada to? Yep. Okay, yeah, that's the last point. And so, yeah, so I think what we're looking to do is that for those who do believe that they're going to be affected, or if you can take your message to a more sort of general message to the government that, there's a lot of different reasons why using these types of issues more politically than you are for the betterment of the country and the environment is, we want to put them on notice to say that we recognize that this is also very political. And, in many of the media clippings that have come out on this issue, a lot of the clippings are referring to the fact that the Prime Minister may be actually triggering a global response where other countries are going to go, look at Canada is taking the lead on this, and so we'll do the same. So it's quite precedent setting. And let me just be clear to say, we're not saying that plastic pollution should stay. What we would like to be able to do is work with the government, as we've worked very hard with the government, certainly prior to my being in this industry and while we've been in this industry. We have put together a program that we literally fly people from all over North America in the vinyl sector into Gatineau, Quebec. And we host a program called Tutorials on Vinyl, and to teach them about this polymer, the versatility, the recyclability, and all of those things, so that we, as we go through, we can partner with them on various initiatives. And I'll talk a little bit about that here in this slide. Thanks, Stan. So,
Aiñe, I just have to give you a time warning. We are up at 12 o'clock. I know we got started late, but we should probably try to get to questions in the next 5 minutes or so here.
Well, I apologize for that, but it is a big issue, and it's not necessarily for us to boil this all down was quite significant. So I'll try to get through this, but this is a quote that I have pulled from a video that we just produced that we did in partnership with Environment and Climate Change Canada. So they said taking action to recycle vital products in Canadian hospitals can increase the amount of plastics that are recycled, which in turn helps to keep this valuable resource in the economy. So from the 2018 G7 summit, that was also, those statements are also part of the final report that the government does recognize the value of plastics in the economy. And so PVC 123, we just launched this program in September, which is a partnership with the government where we are recycling medical devices in hospitals. And so we are truly in a partnership with them. And on that note, we've also been working with Tony Vella, who many of you know, on another proposal to partner with the government on a PVC window profile recycling pilot program as well, which we expect hopefully we'll be able to put into place next year. We've worked with folks in the industry. VECA UK has been a major contributor in all of that. And the point being that the infrastructure for recycling is already here in the vinyl industry, and that presents lots of opportunities. So Stan, if I could get the next slide. Okay, so this actually is our last slide, Patrick. So the ongoing demand for vinyl continues. We're seeing that, and I think especially PPE and all of those things has certainly increased demand. But it's really important to understand the vinyl environmental attributes going forward and how we're positioned as a vinyl industry. There's a number of opportunities in this, and one of them is mostly because we are a 100% recyclable material. So the new reality, as I mentioned earlier, is that all materials in the manufacturing sector have and will be intensively reviewed by ECC going forward post-throne speech. Vinyl is definitely more uniquely positioned or well-positioned for future growth because of its various attributes. First of all, the durability of vinyl, which, as you all know, the life cycle analysis of vinyl can be 100 plus years. So that really feeds into the sustainability narrative and the facts that vinyl is a sustainable material. The recyclability is an absolute key objective of Environment and Climate Change Canada. So we know that because there's the technologies out there, have not evolved as well as they would like. We know that Environment Canada is actively looking to get new recycling programs and technologies in place, hence the PVC 123, and hence the fact that we have been working on proposals for recycling window profiles. Also, the versatility is a key attribute because of the fact that it serves so many markets, whether it's healthcare, underground infrastructure, or building and construction. So the bottom line is that vinyl as a product is very well positioned to not only because we're really ahead of the curve when it comes to recycling, but we actually get to lead, that narrative. And we've even in the last several years have had more advancements, both in rigid PVC and flexible PVC. So I think that's it for now. I don't think there's any more slides left. We just have questions.
Aiñe, thank you so much. I apologize to rush you. I like this.
I understand. Okay.
We could do 2 more hours on this. I am absolutely not joking. I mean, I've been writing notes like crazy here, and I just think that some of the issues that get raised around this, especially the political issues, are incredibly important to talk about. But let's go first of all to questions that are coming in from the audience. Terry Adamson says, and I think this is addressing something that Stan was into. You mentioned there are no explained planned alternatives, and I think what Terry is referencing there is to some of these plastic products that they're talking about banning in some of these, I mean, we know about those horrible paper straws that turn to mush, but whatever. Like some of the plastic products are talking about banning. There's nothing we know of that would particularly replace them. Is it then just left to these other industries stand to come up with alternatives somehow, however they can? And then Terry's other question, and then the follow up to that I think is important is, what does scrutiny of those alternatives look like? Is there any process to determine if the alternative is any better than what they're getting rid of?
Yeah. Well, those are very good questions. The first thing is that they have not actually said, and here's what the alternatives are. In
Right.
fact, they're putting the onus on industry to come up with those alternatives. But one of the points I did make, which addresses the second part of the question, is there is no component in their plan that would require those alternatives to go through the same kind of scrutiny and assessment that they've been putting through the plastic applications through.
Right. And those studies have been done with things like paper, like you mentioned, with the paper bags versus plastic. I mean, there was, God, we spent the whole 90s wrangling over that, and then the idea was you're going to use a cloth bag, and then, oh geez, they're full of bleach and they're full of disease, and they cost 10 times as much energy to make and transport, and right, like, I mean,
that's correct. And look, I think one of the and this is a longstanding principle on behalf of the vinyl industry in Canada, is we've always said you can apply the precautionary principle as much as you want, but you need to apply it to the alternatives as well. And
right.
that there just is no there's no process or function that's out there that's forcing the government to do that.
I think that's a fantastic point, and more on that in a second. But first, Joe Hayden wanted to ask if there is a specific enactment date planned for the regulations. So what's the government's timetable here?
Yeah, so the answer to that question is we don't know. We expect that in order to meet the December 2021 target date, that they would have to issue the proposed regulation very quickly. But I mean, this part of it is fluid. The government can take as long as they want, or they can do it as quickly as they want. When we looked at the microbeads regulation, it was actually about 9 months before they actually published anything. But in this case, what we're expecting is to see something very quickly. Sorry, just the second thing, Patrick, I should have added. Remembering that they still have to put the consultation out, and that there's a period for comment, and then there's some delay, and then they've got to put the actual proposed regulation up for comment. So that's at least 95 days, with 105 days rather, for just those two steps. So you take that off of a year from now, you only have 200 days left, right?
Yeah. And it seems pretty clear to me, just from what I'm hearing, this has all the hallmarks of a very political process that's sort of been decided in advance. One of the questions, though, that I think goes to that is, was there an alternative way for them to proceed without designating all plastics toxic within their regulatory framework? Could they have simply targeted the specific kinds of plastic products that they were worried about? We can all agree that when you buy a toy, there's a ridiculous amount of plastic packaging on it, and do you really need all this? I mean that, like there's could they have just targeted the specific things that they were after?
So that's an excellent question, and I think it's going to be part one, part two. I'll do part one, Stan will do part two. We have had numerous specific conference calls, Stan and myself, with the folks at Environment and Climate Change Canada who are driving all of these efforts, and have asked them specifically about how they're using this tool. That's what I'll say, and then I'll let Stan pick up from there.
Yeah, could they have? Certainly they could have. And in fact, traditionally, that is how the regulators have approached these issues. And again, the best analogy that I can come up with is what they did on microbeads. So they felt microbeads were going to be an issue. To be fair, they did come and talk to some industry stakeholders before they acted on it. But when the actual regulation came out, it wasn't dealing with all microbeads. It was dealing specifically with microbeads that were in cosmetic and sort of dental type of applications like toothpaste, et cetera. And that's sort of our suggestion to them was you should have started with that. What you added to Schedule 1 should have been the very specific things that you were concerned about, not some very large category of things that, for the most part, don't have an issue. And so I suggested in the slides that, you know, it would have been better to say, we are very concerned about these particular applications from these particular polymers. But they didn't want to do that. They want to take this very broad approach so that it gives them all kinds of flexibility. And as Aiñe has said, and I think I alluded to before, yes, right now they're looking at a fairly specific subset of applications. But the way that they're approaching it is we put everything in there and then we can pick and choose as we go along. And that's not very good for manufacturers because we like to have certain.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I thought when I initially saw this. Was I thought, well, there's some kind of, well, again, I think like some kind of legislative or regulatory thing that they have to do where they have to designate this toxic before they can make the other regulation to attack specific things. And I thought, well, you know, maybe it's harmless for that reason. It was just a procedural thing, you know, or some kind of a legal thing that they had to do in order to open the door to make this regulation. But it sounds like they've done other things in the past without having to do that. So,
Patrick, I'd actually just like to speak to that, and I'd like to make a comment here that is not. I'm not coming from a, you know, conservative or liberal or, you know, I don't really care right now, you know, parties. They don't matter to me. It's really about what's going on. And unfortunately, the pattern of this government that is currently in place has demonstrated on many, many different fronts what they're doing that is not according to process. They're not following a lot of the framework that has been set up constitutionally to execute certain goals and objectives. And so if you go back from the beginning of this particular government, again, I'm going to say to everybody, this is, I couldn't care about parties. I care about how it impacts industry, not just the vinyl industry, but all industries in this country, because right now we're bleeding manufacturing into the US. And with all of the other mitigating factors that are going on right now, all the other pressures, it's not going to help our manufacturing sector to stabilize. But this government has repeatedly demonstrated that they don't necessarily follow the rules that are set out before them. And so that is frustrating. You know, Stan and I, and you know, we've been pushing on many, many different angles, and you know, we really are going to make sure that that our submission is going to be part of not just the plastics discussion and pushback, but it's really going to speak to, you know, any manufacturers in general. There's going to be a component of that to fight for the manufacturing sector in this country. And I just quickly, before I finish that comment, as I finish that, I would like to just add one more thing. Between now and December the 4th, we are available to help anybody that would like to submit the comments that we will be circulating. And I just want to make it really clear that you don't have to go draw up your own comments, but all you need to do is send one email to Environment Climate Change Canada with an attachment, and all it needs to say is we support what the Vinyl Institute of Canada is making and stating in their comments. Or the other thing I want everybody to be really aware of is that when the government says, okay, we're going to be receiving comments, that's an invitation and an opportunity for people to say, here are some of the other things that you're going to impact if you do this short term or long term. Use those opportunities to get that in writing, to get it to Environment and Climate Change Canada directly so that it doesn't go into their trash bin. And in this instance, it won't go into their trash bin, but the goal is that if we can get a movement of people to submit their perspectives, whether it's about plastic or anything else, or just the world in general or the economy in general with that attachment, we think that that's really valuable, and it will increase the pressure on the government to perhaps slow down, step back, or maybe make some modifications to how they're going to execute this regulatory statement or addition.
Aiñe, you've done a great job of that was exactly where I wanted to go, was just to get you guys to reiterate where people can go and how they can touch base with you and work with you guys on all of this. A few more questions coming in. What do you think, Stefan? Should we?
Sure, let's go ahead.
Let's do it, man. You know what? If other people are asking questions, I'm going to stay with it.
Yep.
Mark Harger, are you concerned that this could lead to problems in the fenestration industry? For example, misconceptions of vinyl windows off-gassing. Oh God, remember that one. And therefore just as bad as plastic bags. Do you guys think there's an issue here with public perception of plastic that arises from things like this? I guess whichever of you want to take this, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Aiñe, I should probably speak to this. As I mentioned, when the draft science assessment was released, there were a number of associations that submitted comments, including the Vinyl Institute of Canada and the Vinyl Institute in the US. And one of the particular things that was included in the assessment did speak to breakdown of plastics, potential of leaching and off-gassing in the case of windows under ultraviolet light conditions. And they made some assumptions that, quite frankly, cannot be substantiated. And we intend, while we can't influence the final science assessment, which has kept some of that language, we intend to be very clear in the submission that these technical assumptions are inaccurate, and we have the data to support that. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
And also, just again, going back to the recyclability of vinyl products or anything vinyl, whether it's a window or a deck or anything, these are all things that also the government right now, there's limited technologies for polyethylene manufactured products for recycling. That's not to say that they're not working on new technologies, but really vinyl is leading the pack in terms of recycling, and as evidenced by the fact that we are in a legitimate agreement partnership with federal government, Environment and Climate Change Canada, which they've contributed grant money to us to help us roll out our PVC recycling program. And we see more of that coming. And all of those things, when you talk about that, we've been with Tony Vella and John Todd from Fenestration, from Vision Extrusions, we've been doing very deep dives into all of those questions. And so I think I think one of the things that's really important for everybody on this call to understand is that the government is the government. The government will just pick a direction and then go after it. So there's no crystal balling here. One day we could wake up, it could be plastics. The next day you could wake up, it could be wood. Next day you could wake up, it could be fiberglass. Like, we don't know. So I would say right now that their bigger goal is to just do this broad sweeping type of regulatory change. And then whatever their plans are going forward, they're just going to continue to phase it as each year goes on.
Incredible points. Marco Greco is in here, says this is a bit idealistic, but you mentioned this was brought to the government's attention from the outside. Is there an opportunity to identify those agencies, discuss our positions, and arrive at an understanding that will ultimately influence the government? Can we find out who's driving this and have a dialogue with them?
Well, we're doing that every day. Day we're Stan, go ahead. I want you to just really enjoy this one.
Yeah, I used the term ideological earlier in the presentation, and it's very difficult to sit down and have a conversation with someone when their ideological position is you shouldn't exist.
Right.
And that's kind of what we're trying to fight. And could we identify specific organization angos in this case that are out there? Yeah, we could identify those. And that's great, but it doesn't change the fact that they have the influence with the people that are running the government. And you look at the person that was the chief of staff for the prime minister. You look at the person who was the previous minister of finance. These people have deep roots in some of these organizations, and they have a disproportionate influence over the direction that the government is taking.
Well, and to that point, remember one thing, and I may have mentioned this when I was on your program several months back, is that I already mentioned Adam Vaughan, who is very close to the Prime Minister, and also Gerald Butts, who you will all know from the SNC-Lavalin scandal. And Gerald Butts was the former president and CEO of the World Wildlife Fund of Canada, and is very tied in to Greenpeace, very tied into all of those. And again, I'm going to just keep reiterating this. It's not just one industry. It is all industries, and Resolute Forest Products is probably one of the best examples of just being attacked from all angles from Greenpeace. And so Gerald Butts has resigned from his role based on the SNC-Lavalin scandal, but he still is very much in the ear of the federal government, and is very much, we believe, is really driving this hard. And you know, we're just going to keep on hammering at it from every angle that we can. But it's you know, there's extreme viewpoints, and they don't stop to review science properly. And so that is a big part of what we're dealing with right now, and people's emotional reactions to when they're told certain things, and they're told fake news. They're told that things are all over the internet now, and it's hard to really control those various narratives. So you know, a bit at a time, we just keep hammering away and do the best we can. But we're not going to get anywhere if we don't, you know, push ahead. And that's what we're doing in a very orchestrated and deliberate fashion. And we've got a great team behind us in our industry, and of course with Stan and Dr. Breacher and various other technical experts and communication experts. So, but it's all about, I hate to say this because it's such a used term, but when they say with COVID-19, we're all in this together. Well, we're all in this together too. Yeah. Again, it doesn't matter what manufacturing sector that you're in, you're going to have to brace yourselves, because there's more of this coming down in other sectors of manufacturing. It's not just our sector. We're just low-hanging fruit right now.
Stefan, anything from you before I bring this thing in?
No, there's nothing on YouTube. There's no questions either, so
Cool.
I think we're good.
Well, I got to wrap up with a quick editorial then, because I like, Aiñe is absolutely correct that there are somewhat bigger principles at stake here. It's easy to look at these proposals and say, well, they're not targeting our industry. They're going after this and they're going after that. First of all, there is obviously the broader question of designating plastics toxic, which makes it just that much easier for them to just add things to the list down the road. The bigger issue, and the thing I would really like to see the window industry push back against, is absolutely evoking this precautionary principle. This is a position that lobbyists and policymakers take when they have no scientific basis whatsoever for what they're talking about. It is very easy to imagine a threat and then say, well, according to the precautionary principle, then we must not, go down the road of exposing ourselves to that threat. And I'll give you an example. The ban on genetically modified food in Europe is entirely due to that principle. They've banned GMO food over there for a long time, and whether you agree with it or not, the fact of the matter is we've all been eating it over here in North America for now 30 or 40 years with no ill effects on anybody whatsoever that anyone can determine. Yet in Europe, you can't even buy the stuff in areas. So this is the sort of unscientific thinking that can enter into policy making and have very destructive results. So I would like to see, I hope it happens, everybody getting in touch with the Vinyl Institute, getting those letters in, getting those comments in, and really supporting this pushback so that because the problem is when it isn't based on science, it can go in weird directions and it isn't constrained by how far it really should be. It isn't constrained by we're actually saving the environment with this measure. No one cares about that anymore, do they? Because they've evoked this precautionary principle, and now it's just whatever you're afraid of happening is going to happen. That's not how we do risk management, folks. It's not how the insurance industry does risk management. You actually have to have a threat, or at least be able to describe how the threat is going to occur. We don't even have a theory for how these plastics are going to completely destroy the Canadian environment. Like, and to Stan's point from earlier, evoking things that happen in Southeast Asia and Mexico City with no chain of control on the waste. Yeah, absolutely. You get a giant ball of plastics in the ocean because everybody's throwing everything in the ocean. We don't exist in that situation here in Canada. Anyways, off my soapbox. That's my 2 cents. I want to thank Aiñe, and I want to thank Stan Rodriguez from the Vinyl Institute for, guys, a great discussion, really, really informative. And thank you so much for everything you're doing to try to keep this industry from going down the route that the poor people who make plastic straws, I guess are now down. Thanks to both of you very much for joining us here today on Fenestration in Canada. And I encourage everyone to reach out to you and get involved.
Well, thank you very much again, Stefan and Patrick, for having us. It's been a great pleasure. We love engaging with Fenestration Canada. We love the fact that you have this platform where we can have these conversations. And I guess all I would finish off with is just by saying the discussion is on the table federally now, so use it as an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Thank you very much for the invitation, everybody. It's been wonderful speaking with you.
Thanks, guys.